Okay, so hold on, let's get the page where we're holding. It's actually a very interesting piece that we're learning tonight, dealing with getting into as part of the Haggadah for Megillah, which is the Aggadah. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to go a drop back to where we were holding last week. Just a quick review. So last week we spoke about last week we spoke about we're talking about trying to figure out the different names of that we have of verses that would be connected to the areas that we're talking about now of Purim that we started with. Hey, Avi, Aaron, we were talking about Rebbe planted a tree. So we were we're talking about Purim around what's known today as the Galil area. The Galil is the northern parts of Eretz Yisrael, all built around the Kinneret, and the Tveria is on the Kinneret, which is the Sea of the Galilee. Okay, so we're trying to figure out where is what. So Rabbi Yochanan made a statement saying that he spoke to the elders who said Hamas, and then we were talking about this the Hamat Geder hot springs, which is really quite a distance really from Tveria today, which is by a little bit even to the east of the Kinneret, I think. It's really on the foot of the Golan Heights, so on the eastern, towards the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. But I'm not sure if he meant Chamat Geder or not, but either way, we had Chamat, Rabbi Yochanan said that Chamat, and he ran it by the elders, and you have to remember, Rabbi Yochanan lived there. Rabbi Yochanan lived he was the head of the yeshiva. He wrote the Jerusalem Talmud. He was the author. He lived long. He was a young student by Rebbe, and he learned by others. So Rabbi Yochanan lived his bezdin, his yeshiva, and he really ran the Jewish settlement in that were living in the Galil, and he lived in Tveria, that area. So he's there. So he's saying that he asked the elders, and they said they concurred that Hamas is Tveria. Okay, so Hamas, the name that we have in the verse, Hamas is Tveria. And he gives all the reasons why we call it Tveria, because of the hot springs, the Chamit Tveria, the Tiberias hot springs, and that Rakas, another name of a city that we find in the verses, this is referring to Tzipori. Again, we've been talking about Tzipori and Tveria because Rebbe, which was kind of the teacher of Rabbi Yochanan, or maybe the teacher of Rabbi Yochanan, he also studied under Rebbe a little bit. Which was Yehuda Nasi, which was the Nasi, the end of the Mishnah period, because Rabbi Yochanan enters in the what's known as the Amaroim. Rebbe lived initially in Tveria, and seemingly for health reasons, moved west towards the hills into the city of Tzipori. So we want to know where Rebbe lived and where, therefore, when he would keep Purim, if he lived in Tveria, then he would keep it on the 15th, because Rebbe says that we keep it on the 15th, and Chizkiah was questioning if it's the 15th or the 14th, and then we have Tzipori. So we were trying to figure out the names of the cities. So Rakas is Tzipori, according to Rabbi Yochanan's tradition, that he ran by the elders. Again, he lives there. This is Rabbi Yochanan is not talking about, he's not sitting in Bavel, in Babylonia, or in Europe or the United States, talking about a place that's not familiar to him. This is where he lives. Okay, so Rakas, he says, is Tzipori, and he says it's because it's Rakas means like the banks of the river, which is higher than as the beach goes into the water, goes lower. So too Tzipori is higher than going towards the Galilee, which is lower. Okay, and Kinneret, when in the verses Ginosar, which is what we said is again on the western side of the Sea of Galilee, going towards Tzfas, going north. And over there, they said it's nice fields and nice things that grow there, and it's very fertile, etc. Okay, so we continued with Rava, who says, is there anyone who disagrees that Rakas is mi ikal amand amar Rakas lav Tveria? Does anyone argue? And just going a little back, what we said last week is that says Rakas is not Tveria. He brings proof of how because Rava getting that. So Rava is actually runs the yeshiva in Babylonia. So we're talking about like a distance. It's conversation of where we're holding now. It's a difference of, Iran, Iraq versus Eretz Yisrael. We all know we're watching the flights going back and forth. It's not exactly, although there was a very strong communication between the Jewish community of Bavel and the Jewish community of Eretz Yisrael, but there were different places. Rava lived in Bavel, and he was definitely after Rabbi Yochanan. He was the second or third generation of Amoraim, so he was after Rav. Rav is the time of Rav was a colleague of Rabbi Yochanan. They lived Rav and Shmuel. They also learned by Rabbi, but they went back and forth. But Rava is later, and he's in Bavel. So he's asking, what are you talking about? Does anyone disagree that Rakas is not Tveria? Because we know how people eulogize, because again, they would send people back even then. It was an idea to send people to be buried in Eretz Yisrael, which is something that's done till today. People buy property, burial lots in Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim, and now recently our friend Paul Azus was just buried in Beit Shemesh, where that's people buy over there. But there's all these beautiful, of course, there's a big schus to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. He even brings down, the reason I'm going back is I wanted to bring down a few points. He says that the Rambam writes in Hilchas Malachim, which is towards the end of the book of the Rambam. That's one of the final parts of the Rambam. He writes, Amr Chacham Kol HaShoichem Eretz Yisrael Avinoisav Moichlin Lights brought down whoever lives in Eretz Yisrael, his or her sins, Avoinos, our sins, are forgiven. And also he mentions a cover boy, someone who's buried in Eretz Yisrael, even if you don't live there, but you're buried there, and that's what people would send their dead to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. Nischaper loy is their sins are atoned for. So there's a difference between moichlin, there's forgiveness, and then there's atonement. So if you're buried in Eretz Yisrael, you have atonement. And he says, and he says, the great scholars would bring their dead to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. And like he says, we learn from Yaakov and we learn from Yosef. And he even quotes the Shalos HaTshuva that says that it's a mitzvah. He calls it a mitzvah. Lahalis atzamis talmid chacham Eretz Yisrael, to bring the dead to Eretz Yisrael. And that's why we find that even people bring people that have been pre-buried in Europe or where have you to be reburied. I mean, my wife's grandfather was buried in London, and when his wife passed away, not too many years ago, they brought his body to Eretz Yisrael to be buried beside his wife. So that's something that was done, even that it's brought down in the Chuvas to do that. So he says, hey, Danny, that again, so Rava asks that in the eulogies that they would eulogize, so they had to take the body from here to there, and so there's a kind of eulogy, and they had this language that went between the two countries of who's coming from what, because the Talmid Chachamim, we're talking about scholars would come, and holy scholars would come and be buried in Eretz Yisrael. So they would have different eulogies, the eulogies in Babylonia, and then they would eulogize again in Eretz Yisrael, and to awaken to kind of that people should give respect to the person that's coming from Bavel. So, but they were using language that clearly showed that Rakas was Tveria. Okay, so therefore Rava asked the question who if there's anyone who disagrees, and therefore Rava says that Rakas is Tveria. Okay, we did this last week, but I'm going to start from the text from over here. Okay, and then we're going to try to Kinach nafshid Reb Zera. When Reb Zera passes away. Now, why is Reb Zera unique? Because Reb Zera himself lived in Bavel, studied in Bavel, and with tremendous effort made Aliyah to go to Eretz Yisrael. We talk about how he fasted tremendous amount of fast to kind of wipe his hard drive of any memory of his Torah study in Bavel, so he could come fresh with the Torah study in Eretz Yisrael. So Pasach Halu Safadna, so when they eulogized him, and he lived his adult kind of mature life in Eretz Yisrael, that Eretz Shinar Harav Yolda, that Eretz Shinar, meaning Bavel, gave birth to Rabbi Zera, and Svi, which is talking about the deer, which is referring to Eretz Yisrael, which is known as Eretz Tzvi. Gidla Shashueha raised her delight. And it says, Oina la amr rakas ki ibda klichem dasa. So therefore Rakas says that like in woe to Rakas who lost its kli chemdasa, its precious instrument, referring to Reb Zera. Again, Rakas would be because the yeshiva was in Tveria in the north. So they're eulogizing Reb Zera. It's brought down, it's going to bring down that one of the reasons I think the Baal B'chor Shar says that what's unique about Reb Zera is that he was, they say there's a concept of that whenever there's nothing, we have a tradition that when one tzaddik passes away, the next tzaddik is born. Like it says, when Rabbi Kiva died, Rebbe was born. This is, I think Gemara Shabbos says, "Ba Hashemesh, Zarach Hashemesh." As the sun sets, the sun rises. So the sun sets on Rabbi Kiva, it rises on Rebbe. So there's a kind of consistency of great scholars. Where you have Reb Zera, which was unique about him. Why is it woe? Because of Reb Zera specifically, because of his efforts of coming up from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. So it's not so simple to just say, okay, well, there's going to be another righteous tzaddik that comes after Reb Zera, because it's not so simple to come after Reb Zera. That's how great Reb Zera is, because of a person that studied both in Bavel and Eretz Yisrael. He wasn't the only one, but it seems like from the stories that we have, he was unique when it comes to making aliyah, and he stayed there also. When Rav and Shmuel came to Eretz Yisrael, they came to Eretz Yisrael and they went back to learn to live in Bavel. Reb Zera stayed in Eretz Yisrael. He didn't go back to Bavel. He kind of, like I said, he wiped his hard drive of Bavel and started again fresh in Eretz Yisrael. So he says, Mishum Hachi, therefore he says, Rakas ki avdik li chamdasa. Therefore it's unique that he passes away, and therefore he's a chad, he's unique, not just anyone else that comes to replace him. Okay, so that's what we talk about, that Reb Zera. He continues, Ela Omer Rabba. So what is it? Is Rakas Tveria, or is Rakas Tzipori, or what have you? So he says, Elam Rava, Rabba says, or some say Rava says, there's different versions. Chamas is Chamigror. That's we could be call it maybe Chamat Gader, or maybe other hot springs. Rakas is Tveria. The problem that we have with a little bit of the names is you could very simply, if you remember when we started this whole conversation about Tveria, we showed on the map in what's called today the Tveria National Park is called the Chamas National Park, I think. So that area could kind of extend, and you could call it Chamas less and call it Tveria as part of it, but you can't borrow a name of being, if you're not a primary place. So if two primary cities are not going to be under one name, it's going to be, each one has its own name. If you're a secondary city, you could kind of fall under the auspices of the larger cities. So Tveria is its own proper city. So it says Chamas is Chamigror, Rakas is Tveria. Kinneret is Ginoiser. Okay, so we keep with Kinneret being the Ginoiser, which is the fertile area up in the north along the Sea of Galilee on the west side. Rakas. So why do we call it Rakas? Why is Tveria called Rakas? He gives a reason. Like we learned that even those Rakas is also from the word rake, and the root of the word is empty. That even those who are empty, meaning not great doers of Torah mitzvahs, nevertheless are filled, like we know, we talk about Rosh Hashanah, are full of mitzvahs like a rimon, like a pomegranate, and based on the pasuk Kipel Charimon. Okay, Rabbi Yirmiyah Omer, Rakas Shma v'lam nikra Shma Tveria. It's called Rakas. Why is it called Tveria? Means the question is, what's its primary name? Is it Rakas or Tveria? So her name is Rakas. Why would we call it Tveria? She yesheves b'tibur Eretz Yisrael, because it sits in the main part, the center of Eretz Yisrael. Again, we know that Tiberius was named after the Caesar Tiberius, but this is also to give kind of deeper meaning. Rava says Rakas Shema Rakas is its name. Why do we call it Tveria? Because Shetoiva Riyasa, that the Tveria is just alluding to the concept that it's a good place, it's pleasant to see. Also talking about Riyasa, it's brought down that the commentaries bring down that those who see, which are known as the Einei Ha'eda, the leadership, which the Sanhedrin sat in Tveria. Again, we have to remember, Tveria is not a city that's stam. When I say stam, I mean just a city. When we talk about the four holy cities in Eretz Yisrael, Tveria is a holy city. We know the Chassidus, the Chassidic centers that started after the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Haradak, they went and they're buried in Tveria. Tveria is a holy city, Ir HaKodesh, and Tveria is the city that housed the Sanhedrin until at least Rebbe moved to Tzipori, and then it also afterwards, Rabbi Yochanan was in Tveria, and again, the Rambam writes the halacha, that the tradition is, it doesn't, he says in halacha, but he says it's the tradition. And when Mashiach comes, there's a tradition that's going to be announced in Tveria, and that the Sanhedrin will be reestablished in Tveria. So it will remain as a center. From Tveria, it's going to come back to the Har Bayis, to Eretz Yisrael. Okay, how's that going to be? Well, we'll find out soon. So B'tibur Rash says B'emtsuisa. So let's see. I don't think we learned the Rabbi Steinsaltz's commentary on this part. So that's where we're starting back a bit. I saw somewhere it says, why does it say? What's that? What just that we find this language before in other places in Talmud. Why do we say when someone passes away, do we use the expression "ki noch nafshe" when his soul rested? Why do we use that? So that's brought down. He says is it the Marsha? He says, or maybe someone else says that the reason is maybe some Sofer. He says the reason is because a person who, while they're alive in this world, you're never supposed to rest, right? Because Yaakov wanted to rest. You're not supposed to rest. You're always trying to overcome your evil inclination. You're always working on yourself. It's not a time to rest. We don't live in this world to rest. Of course, you have moments of rest. We're supposed to sleep to get our energy. But the idea of kinach nafshe, like I don't have a struggle anymore. That's not for this world. But when a person passes away, so no longer does the person have a struggle. There's no more Yetzer Hara. There's no place for tshuva anymore, right? You can't do tshuva once you pass away. You can't do repentance once you pass away. So therefore, the Chachamim use the language kinach nafshe. So that's why it says by Reb Zera, kinach Reb Zera, and Reb Zera noch from the word Noach. When he rested, then what does it mean rested? He passed on to the next world, where it's no longer a world of tension, a world more of relaxation. I mean, relaxation, you're constantly you're growing, but not with the struggles that we have in this world. Okay. Afilu Rikonim Sheba Reb Shteinzer says the author Turi Even of Ever asked, why is this applied specifically to Tveria? There's people that are, so to say, empty of Torah mitzvahs in other places, not just Tveria. And also about them we say on Rosh Hashanah that they're full of mitzvahs like a pomegranate. And the Gemara says elsewhere in Brachas, this is said for the entire Jewish people. It would appear that Rabbah emphasized in this, I mean, and not only that, according to Rabbah, we're calling the city Rekonis is because Rakas, we're calling it Rakas because the city represents the idea that even the simple people are full of mitzvahs like a Rima. I mean, so you're naming the city about something that's not specific to Tveria. So he says this is entire. So it appeared that Rabbah emphasized in this Gemara that was even more true in Tiberias. It means that even though everywhere, even the simple people, I don't mean simple, but a person empty doesn't mean simple. Empty means you're a person that maybe it's hard to find how much time they spent, he or she, in doing they're living their life in the Torah observant way. Nevertheless, we say as a comment, you should know that even the most person that hasn't spent their time studying Torah and doing mitzvahs the whole time are still full of mitzvahs like a rimon. That's why we eat pomegranates in Rosh Hashanah. So we're kind of telling God that even if we don't look great, we're still full of mitzvahs like a pomegranate. But why do we say about Tveria? Because it's even more true about Tveria. Due to the city's unique position as the religious capital of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore even the person that was maybe considered a rake, empty, was still more full because, it's like when you live in a strong Jewish community, and especially a strong Jewish community like Tveria in those days, so you're always around, everything's around Yiddishkeit. Your business is around Yiddishkeit. Your whole life is around Yiddishkeit. It's a very central place. And we have these places today. So when you have a place like that, your whole life, even if you're seemingly not so much observant, but you're kind of living in a life around Torah mitzvahs, and therefore it's more appropriate to call Tveria a city that symbolizes the idea of the pomegranate. Even during the time of Rav Sadia Gaon, which is later, Rav Sadia Gaon we know was later the Gaon in Naharda in Bavel. Right, he ran the yeshivas of Bavel. There was a great Rav Sadia Gaon. Also, it was considered. I think he lived in Eretz Yisrael for a while. It could be came from Eretz Yisrael. It was considered an important religious center. So it remained a religious center even in the times of the Gaonim. And again, if I remember correctly, there was a Gaon in the times of Rav Sadia Gaon in Tveria. Additionally, the vowel notation, so we learned this last week, of the Hebrew language is used today, was developed in Tveria, so it's an important city. It's certainly well known that the city is named after the Roman Emperor Tiberius. Nevertheless, the name of the city was imprinted in a way that they were able to be medayik in its name. Okay, he says also, Shetayva Riyasa, Tosfos explains, again, the Tosfos is not in order, and this page was the layout on the page from the Steinsaltz Institute has to redo this page. They didn't put things in order. So the Tosfos is here, but the Tosfos says, we didn't learn it because it's later in the page. It explains that the city was pleasing. So the idea of Tov Riyasa means pleasing. The Mashra explains that the phrase should be interpreted to mean that Tiberias was the seat of the great Sanhedrin for the time, and the sages was who resided there could perceive things that others could not. So the idea of seeing things is not just physically, but also spiritually. According to this, the word riyata is to be interpreted its vision. Others write that since Tiberias did not have a wall, so it had a very nice view, because we learned last week that their Tveria was not walled in. Okay. Sorry for the first 20 minutes of Chazara, but now we're going to start from what we did not learn last week. Amr Zeir says, Kitron, what about the city Kitron? What is Kitron? Where is that? That is Tzipori. Again, Tzipori is the north, is the west of Tveria in the mountains, towards the Canary, towards the Mediterranean. So if it's Kitron, why do we call it Tzipori? Tzipori is what's the root word of Tzipori? Is a tzipor, is a bird. Because it sits on top of the mountain like a bird sits on top of the tree or the mountain, or the high spot. Vikitron Tzipori. Now the Gemara again says, one second. Who says this? Zeira says that Kitron is Tzipori. Why is that such a simple fact? Now we're getting into the story of the breakout. Now, again, I'm not sure. I have to check better. Everyone knows that you open up the Chumash and you talk about Zevulun, right? Samach Zevulun b'tzeisecha, Yisachar ba'oye halacha. That Zevulun represented the business person, and Yisachar represents the Torah scholar. And we all know that there was a business relationship between Zevulun and Yisachar, the tribes of Zevulun and Yisachar, that Zevulun did business, Yisachar learned Torah, and Zevulun supported Yisachar, and they shared. Zevulun shared in the Torah study of Yisachar, and Yisachar shared in the finances of Zevulun. And by the way, I want you to know that this idea of Yisachar and Zevulun was kept with the Jewish people, started from Yaakov, who mentions it, all the way till our times, where there's a relationship. A person wants to go into business, or a person doesn't want to, is not able, for whatever reason, is not what you call a Torah scholar, but wants to be a person that's connected to a Torah scholar. I mean, you want to be able to go say that I've learned most of my life, but you didn't. So what do? You support Torah scholars, and you have a deal. And it's not just you write a check to someone who studies Torah, and that's called Zevulun. You have actually, I know a person right now, you're in Rechavia, that signs contracts. It's a business relationship where literally he gets into business relationships with a Yisachar to be this Torah. It's a proper partnership. You study Torah a whole day, so they have to have a contract. You can't just say I'm studying Torah, you're not going to show up. So you have to commit to 8, 12, whatever his deal is. How many hours a day you're going to study? What you're going to study? Where you're going to study? And he supports them 100%. It's not like he gives them a check. He writes them. He gives them whatever he agrees to. 5,000 a month, 10,000 a month, whatever it costs him to live. Because he would like to study Torah a day and he can't. So for whatever reason he won't. So he has that was a business relationship that Yisachar and Zevulun had from the beginning of times. But why am I mentioning this? Because the idea of Samach Zevulun b'tzeisecha is that we always have this idea that Zevulun lived on the sea, and they constantly were business people, and they were traveling, and they're all over the world, and they went on the boat. My grandfather has a story. The Rebbe once told him, that you have to learn Torah also. When Zevulun went on the boat, he took with him a Chumash and a Tanya. But we see clearly there's a concept of Zevulun living on the water. But if you look because now we're going to talk about where Zevulun is, if we actually look where Zevulun is, they're not on the sea. So Zevulun is, let's say over here. Hold on, Aaron, 1 second. Zevulun is here, which is kind of, it would make sense that Tzipori is nearby, because here's the Sea of Galilee, so it's going west towards but it doesn't have any beach area. You have Usher that's blocking the whole beach, and Menashe blocking over here. Zevulun and Yisachar right next to each other. But if you can't see, but this line over here, if you look in other pictures, actually looks like, you see over here, it must be a big river space. I don't know what that river space is today, but it's not the Arcana, obviously. But that basically would be this, maybe how they would travel to the sea through the river. Like in any big city, you have a river that takes you to the main sea. Why were they more on the sea than Usher? It's not clear, but they were definitely considered C people. Yes, Aaron.
Okay. You remember a while ago we talked about you can't study anything that you didn't study even a little bit when you get up to the next world. If you pay for somebody, like you just mentioned, everything they studied, now you can study up
Yeah,
when
and
you
that
get.
it's an excellent question. Aaron is asking is a concept that you only study in the world to come, subjects that you studied in this world. So if you didn't cover certain subjects, then you don't study those subjects in heaven. I would assume yes, because you have a business. It's a partnership, in a true partnership. If you own a company, if one person is the baker and the other person is the chef, right? So you get 100% of the profit 50-50. So too, you have 100% of the spiritual profit 50-50. So if you're Yisachar, by the way, everyone always says the Yisachar is looking for the right Zevulun. Means the Torah scholar is looking for who's going to support them, right? But I once saw, I think in the name of my great grandfather, he says a real Chacham, maybe the name of the Rebbe Marash, I think. The real Chacham is that the Zevulun has to refine the right Yisachar, because the Zevulun wants to make sure you have the right partnership with the person who's studying Torah. But a very good point, Aaron. All right, so he says, so again, we just saw now on the map, it's not so crazy that Zevulun is, okay, I just want to bring the map one more time because we're going to be discussing also Yisachar. Not Yisachar, we're going to be Naphtali. So Ramat Naphtali. So okay, these are the four tribes in this area, what we know as the Galilee going towards Haifa. So we have Asher over here, Naphtali over there, which is still today Naphtali going all the way towards Lebanon, over the valley, Ramat Naphtali. You have Zevulun and you have Yisachar and Menashe. So Zevulun is it's very likely that Tzipori is in Zevulun. Here's Naphtali, but Naphtali also covers the beach on the Kinneret. So Zevulun, it depends on this little space over here, the distance. Yes, Aaron. All right. So he says like this: Kitron Zevulun. Kitron was in Zevulun. Tichsiv, how do we know that Kitron is in Zevulun? It says Zevulun lo yihirish says Yoshvi Kitron is Yoshvi Nahalol. It says in Judges that they didn't properly conquer their land, Zevulun, and they didn't settle Kitron and Nahalol, and therefore there was kind of nations there and there's trouble there because they didn't settle that land. Uzvulun Misraim al Midois Avava. Okay, so here we find like this. So it says, the Torah said Moshe was told the Jewish people that when they entered the land, lo yisachai kol neshama, you can't let any one of the nations live. You have to kick everyone out, and the Jewish people have to settle the land. It was kind of up to each tribe to settle their area. They didn't go massive wars definitely after Joshua. It was kind of each tribe had their job to take care of their land. That's what we find the beginning of Judges. Mi ala barosh. And Shimon asks Yehuda to help them because Yehuda is kind of surrounds the part of Shimon. So here we have the Zevulun. It says they didn't go according to the commandment of Hashem of Lo Yischai Kol Neshama, and they left the people there and they suffered because of that. Why did they leave them there? So it says that they left them there because they wanted to collect taxes from them. Meaning to say that Zevulun, although Zevulun has a very small portion, at least on the map, when it comes to Eretz Yisrael, like I said, I'm not going to bring up the map again, but we saw clearly Zevulun's a very small, looks at least square footage of land, unless the map is not showing exactly the full picture, but it doesn't look like it's a large piece of land. But nevertheless, it could be they were a smaller tribe. And they wanted to collect taxes, so they collected taxes, and they didn't get rid of all these places, and they didn't get rid of Kitron and Naalol. So therefore, Kitron is clearly Zevulun, and therefore you can't say Kitron is Sipori. We'll see why not. Uzvulun, not only that, Zvulun Misraim al Midaisav Hava. So this is the point. It's brought down that Zvulun complained to God. Misraim means complained. Al Midaisav. Midaisav is referring to God's attributes. Means saying to God, you weren't fair. Zevulun am cherif nafshis lamos. It says Zevulun was a people that jeopardized their lives to the death. What that means exactly, we'll see in a second. Matam, and why were they upset, so to say, complaining. The Naphtali Amarei Misade, because it says in Judges that they looked at Naphtali again. Remember, Naphtali was kind of comes in between the Kinneret and Zevulun, and then wraps around them to the north. So it's northeast. It's east, and then goes north of Zevulun. When Sisera fought then in that area, Sisera, right? Where was Barak? They were all from the Ramat Naphtali. That was Devorah was in Naphtali. So when Naphtali came and they fought against Sisera in the book of Judges, then they called the nations, and she gives praise and she lists who came and who did not come, and she says that during the war, Zevulun went through Naphtali's area, and for some reason they never visited their neighbors, and only then they noticed that their neighbors has a better lot of land according to their opinion, and therefore they complained. The Naphtali had the nice places of the field, and they thought that God gave Naphtali better than they gave Zevulun. So Misram Amidai said they complained to God. It says, so Rashi quotes what I said before, that the Zevulun did not get rid of all the cities of the inhabitants of the city of Kitron. Why? Because they wanted to collect taxes. They wanted income. So they left the nations, and then you get what you pay for. So you leave the nations, and you're going to get, with the income comes troubles. And that's later they had to suffer for that. Al Midaisav, what it means that they complained on the Midah. So Rashi explains Al Mazale. They kind of complained that their luck wasn't good. Shenimdad Lo Min Hashemayim, that God gave them. They didn't look at it as nowhere. It was God basically complaining. They complained to God. Why? Exactly. Okay, so Judah said that Zevulun did show up for the war of Devorah. Yes. She'eni Chafetzba, meaning they didn't like what they were dealt, meaning to say they thought Naphtali got a better piece of land than they did, and they were, I don't know if the word's jealous, but they're not too happy about it. And God actually has we're going to see now, God has a conversation with them about this. So hold on a second. Again, this is part of the Shira of Devorah. It says Zevulun am cheref nafshi lamus v'Naftali amrei misada. So the beginning of the verse is that they fought to their death, and Naphtali, and at the same time they look at Naphtali that they were living on the high plains. So from this, the rabbis take out that Devorah was kind of ensuing that Zevulun were also complaining about Naphtali having again. I'm not an expert of Eretz Yisrael. I've been to all these places, but the fact is also that Naphtali is beautiful, and we have the Ramot and the beautiful hills of Naphtali overlooking the views. The high places in Naphtali are, I think, the high places of the Galil are even higher than the Golan Heights. So it says. Also that the part of the translation is that Zvulun am charf nafshi lam was kind of, they were like, they wanted to die. Why? Because when they saw what happened with Naphtali, that Naphtali had a better piece of land. Why? Because it says they had Sadis, Ikramim, and they were kind of like, kicking dust to death because that's one explanation, because they didn't feel that they got, that they were blessed with the same nice land as Naphtali had. But the simple translation, the Marsha says, is that they were good fighters. They fought for their lives because literally their lives depended on it. It means if they would lose the war, Sisera would destroy the whole Galil. Okay, so what does it mean? Jeopardize their lives to death. So Rabbi Shleinzal says the interpretation of this verse indicates that it was as if the members of the tribe of Zevulun wanted to die because they were angered over the shortcomings of their portion. Again, literally on the map, they have a tiny piece of land. I mean, the Marsha writes that during the war against the enemy forces commanded by Sisera, that was the war of Devorah, like Judith mentions, Devorah and Barak, about which this verse is written. The people of Zevulun passed through Naphtali's portion and compared it to the unfertile land. They looked at Naphtali and saw beautiful fields and krumim and vineyards, and they felt that they were short. They were dealt a short piece of land. However, the simple explanation of this verse is that because Zevulun had meager land, and the Gentiles did not let them spread out, I don't know what that means. The Gentiles and not let them spread out. I mean, why them more? They were literally where are they supposed to spread out? They're surrounded by the other tribes. It could be, but that's the reference at the beginning of the verse that they didn't get rid of these cities, so therefore they had Gentiles amongst them. That didn't work out great for them. They wanted the taxes, but like I said, the taxes came back to bite them. They fought harder in the war and risked their lives. So they were fighting again, like for their lives, because they felt very entrapped. Okay. So what happens? What does Zevulun say to God? Rebbeinu Shalom, the master of the universe. To my brother, meaning the tribe of Naphtali, you give fields and vineyards. And me you give mountains and valleys, which is obviously, as far as they're concerned, not as good. Them you give land, me you give sea and rivers, or lakes and rivers. Again, the Zevulun is not on the beach of the Mediterranean. It's just not, according to the map. So they could be obviously they have the waters running through and the rivers, but when it means that they traveled the sea, they went through the river, but they're not a beach portion. So God answered back to them. So they felt shortcoming. Now again, this is the idea of this is like the complex. The person with the complex fights harder for business and has something to prove. So Zvulun felt they had something to prove. At the end, they are known as the businessmen, right? Who is the business people of the tribes? If you ask anyone, who's the pragmatia, like Rashi says, they go out there, they traveled, they were in commerce, they were international traders. The Rashi quotes in our parsha, and the Gemara doesn't say it. Rashi quotes, I think it's either in Devarim or in the blessings of Yaakov, that all the international trade went through Zevulun. And when the nations came to Zevulun to trade with Zevulun, so then they saw Zevulun, they made their way all the way up to the Beis Hamikdash. So Zevulun kind of caused that there should be people that thanked Hashem because they went to the Beis Hamikdash because of Zevulun. But again, they didn't go to Zevulun because they were on the ports. Maybe they were the ports out via the river ports, but not seaports. And nevertheless, they had this chip on the shoulder, and they maybe also didn't have a lot of business inside, so they had to go outside. But Hashem said like this. What does Hashem answer back? They were commercial merchants, but it doesn't mean that they were very much commercial merchants. It doesn't mean they were on the sea. So it says, so they don't have the fields. So Hashem says to them, everyone's going to need you. Why? Chilazon. Chilazon is the snail, Chilazon snail. That the reason they're going to need them is because they're so to say their blood is the dye used for the Techelet tzitzis. So the Techelet tzitzis that we have, which is blue, and some people feel that they found the Chilazon today. And therefore, if you go to different shuls, you'll see people, and maybe you yourself have a talis that has the blue strings. There's the tcheles. It has to be made from the chilazon. It's a special kind of dye. So for the kind of dye, thinking was that we lost track of what that chilazon is, or they couldn't find it, what have you. But today, evidently, there are people that wear tcheles, and there's a strong case to say that they're correct. Either way, I'm not here to judge that, but nevertheless, the Chilazon was in the tribe of Zevulun. Shenemim amim har yikro ushfuni tmunichol. Okay, so from the verse we learned that it says about Zevulun's portion, that it says amim har yikaru, they shall call to the people of the mountain, meaning Zevulun. There they shall sacrifice, and then it continues that there they shall sacrifice offerings of righteousness, which is, Rashi says that's why the nations that they come to Zevulun will make their way to the Beis Hamikdash. For they shall suck of the abundance of the seas and of the hidden treasures of the sand. So we're going to learn that Zevulun had a lot of natural resources. One of the natural resources was the actual Chilazon, which is the snail. Now, seemingly that's why the chilazon came from the sea. The moisture gives off, obviously, for snails and slugs, but they didn't go into Asher, which was on the boat. They went into maybe because whatever, I guess the climate, whatever it is, they ended up in Zevulun's part. And the mountains of Zevulun was full of these snails of the Chilazon, and therefore they made a lot of business because they sold the Chilazon, and everyone needed it for the Techelet. It's God said, don't worry about your portion. Everyone's going to need you. Okay, this is obviously deep into, at least a few hundred years after they entered the land, or hundreds of years after they entered the land. So Rashi says, the Chilazon comes from the sea, laharim, so it makes its way all the way to Zevulun. Again, they don't stop by Asher, they go into Zevulun. And its blood is used, tzayvim means they dye with its blood, the Techelet, the blue tzitzis. V'nimkar b'dami mikarim, and they sold it for it was an expensive item because everyone needed Techelet, it's a mitzvah. So everyone needed Techelet, and they made business at Zevulun. Evidently, the entire tribe survived partially off the income from the Techelet, from the Chilazon. Amim har yikaru mikol hashvatim. What does it mean, Amim? The nations, meaning, so right here the Gemara learns, this pasuk is learned different ways. So here they're learning the pasuk to say that Amim Har Yikaru, the nations will gather, will call to the mountain, means the nations, meaning Kol Hashvatim, the different tribes, the other 11 tribes, Yiskapsu L'Harecha, they're going to come to your mountains, Liknais Shifuni Tmunichal, to buy the treasures that you have. And when we learned they had various treasures, they had the Chilazon, they had a special kind of sardine fish, they had white sand used for glass, so they had natural resources, one of them the Chilazon, so everyone's going to come to them. Again, Rashi quotes in the Chumash that Amim Hem Yikaru is talking about the nations outside of Eretz Yisrael. The Gentiles are going to come to the Har Yikaru, they're going to call out to God in the mountain, meaning to Harabayis, because of the business they do with Zevulun. Either way, the tradition is Zevulun evidently had income from the land, and they also were international traders. They traveled the world, and people did commerce with them from outside, and then they would come to Eretz Yisrael. They would go already all the way up to the Beis Hamikdash, and there was that was a credit to Zevulun bringing people to Eretz Yisrael because of business. Okay, I don't know if they had metal. We'll see. Tani Rav Yosef Reza says, Shifune. What does the word Shifune mean? Which is a treasure. This is Chilazon. That's the Chilazon, that this snail, that the dye, the blood is used for the Techelet. Tumune, what does it mean? Tumune, kind of, also the word tamun means hidden in. Zu taris. This is the taris, is the sardine type of fish. Again, maybe it's a river fish. I don't know. I don't know the origins of the sardine. Choil, what does it mean? Choil, which means sand. That they had special quality sand that was good for glass. Zechuchis is glass, white glass, or maybe he means what does he call it over here? Rabbi Yosef teaches that treasures. This is referring to the Chilazon, which is found in the waters of Zevulun or the hills of Zevulun. Hidden, this is referring to the taret, which is the fish, a type of sardine, which is also found by Zevulun's coastal waters. Again, Reb Steinzos keeps on calling coastal waters. I don't know what it means. Unless I'm missing something, it doesn't show anywhere that Zevulun is on the sea. Sand, this is referring to sand from white glass, or maybe China, that they had in the portion of Zevulun. Again, God is telling Zevulun, don't worry about it. You have plenty of resources, if Zevulun, I think they also look for oil around over there, or maybe oils in Asher. Sorry, not yet. So Zevulun said, 1 second. The resources that we have, we don't have protection of them. How do we know someone's not going to come in and just take the Chilazon and just take the sands? How do we know people are not going to come and steal from us? So again, the Sham Yizbechu Zivchei Tzedek is also a continuation of the verse. The verse says that Amim Hem Yikaru Sham Yizbechu Zivchei Tzedek. So Rashi again learns, talking about the nations are going to come because of business with Zevulun, and then they're going to go to the mountain, meaning the Beis Hamikdash, and then Yizbechu Zivchei Tzedek, they're going to sacrifices and blessing Hashem for the greatness of the Beis Hamikdash and the Jewish people and the tradition of Torah. But here he's saying Sham Yizbechu Zivchei Tzedek means Simen Zeh Yilachad. Use this as a sign. Whoever is going to take from your resources and not pay for it, because it's in your land, they have to pay for it. So it's going to be like a wasted. What does it mean? Sham Yizbechu Zivchei Tzedek, that there they sacrifices of justice. If it's not going to be a justice, then it's going to be like a person who gives a sacrifice that's not theirs, and therefore it doesn't help, so too they're going to take from you, and it's not going to help. They're going to Parmaktia means business. They're not going to yield any income from taking from you without paying. So let's see Rashi. Rashi says, Shfuni ze Chilazon shu davar chashiv, safan chashiv b'lashon b'raisa. Safan means it's a treasure. Why is it a treasure? Because again, Chilazon was valuable because of its blood used for the dye, and therefore they're going to make money from that. Again, God is trying to basically tell Zevulun, or is telling Zevulun, that don't be so concerned. You have other blessings. Maybe it doesn't look so nice, but you have land that has a lot of blessings. Taris, he says, dag, it's a kind of fish which is called tunina. Again, it's some sort of sardine. It's not a tuna, obviously. They don't have tuna is a huge fish. Zechuchias levana. What does it mean? White glass. Hayotzim menachol, that comes in the sand. Again, till today they're using the sands. I don't know if anyone. I think Caesarea. I'm not sure if Caesarea is in Zevulun's area. Maybe it's Usher, but Caesarea is on the sea. They have what's called the Caesarea stones, where they make from the sand. They make what is it called? Countertops, etc. So this till today it's used. So and Zevulun had a very unique, valuable sand for this glass making, and you can make clear glass. So again, the glass was coming from Zevulun. I think once many years ago I looked into a company that's making glass in that area. How am I going to know that people should pay me? God says whoever's going to take a snail and not pay for it, they're not going to be successful in business. Just like you're not allowed to steal, you're not allowed to take from Zevulun. If they're going to take even a small amount, Shavapruta means a small amount, and not pay for it, so what's going to happen? Their dye process is going to be damaged. It's not going to be fruitful. And the sand won't make good glass. God is saying, don't worry about it. It's not going to be in anyone's interest to take from your resources and not pay. Okay. Again, we still didn't get to the question. The question is that how do we know that what was the name of the place? Kitron is Tzipori or not. So let's just look quickly from Reb Stein's thoughts. Although there are many opinions as to the identity of the Chilazon, many researchers are of the opinion that is referring to a Murxus trunculus kind of snail, a tropical sea snail. Others have suggested this the common catfish, Sophia, or the bubble raft snail. Okay, there's different. The sky blue Techelet dye used for the mitzvah to place a sky blue thread on the ritual fringes for tzitzis is extracted from the Chilazon dye, purple dye. It is also produced from the Chilazon, and both of these dyes were needed for the priestly clothing. Okay, it's not just the tzitzis, also for the Techelet that was used in the Big Day Kahuna. So therefore, they had to have the Techelet that was all coming from Zevulun. It says a sky blue thread, fringes extracted from the Chilazon. Purple dye is also produced from the Chilazon, argamon. So argamon is purple, so both the purple and the blue comes from the Chilazon. Taris is a sardine, also known as the round sardinella. It is a species of sardine that is commonly eaten salted. I think also, okay. It is found in the vast numbers in the Mediterranean Sea, and is listed among them the items which in the coast of Eretz Yisrael are blessed. Again, I think that Zevulun kind of were fishermen, but their access was via the rivers. Zechuchis levana, glass is usually made from a mixture of several silicates, however you pronounce that, most of which are from the sea sand. However, it is difficult to find suitable mixture so that they were able to have that will be easy to fuse and will not have any metallic substance. You don't Janet asked about the metallics, the metals. So you want to have less metallic, so the sand should yield a clear glass that give it color. White glass is either completely transparent or white, and that's very expensive in ancient times. So the glass, the kind of sand you need for glass, was more expensive, and therefore it was a blessing to Zevulun. Okay, so what's this all mean to our Talmud? So now the question is like this. Based on everything we know so far, we went back to the point that is Kitron Tzipori. So he says, Amai Misraim Amid. Again, on the map, it looks like it's Kitron and Tzipori. So Amai Misraim Amidaisa. Why are they complaining about their portion? Tzipori is a very good place. And if that's in the portion of Zevulun, why would they complain about Tzipori? Because we know clearly Kitron is part of Zevulun, and if Kitron is Tzipori, so they have no reason to complain, to compare, and to say that Naphtali has a bit nicer piece of land. So he goes, yes, Tzipori may be beautiful, but it's not flowing with milk and honey, and that's the true blessing of Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Zavas Chalav V'Dvash. Reish Lakish says, I saw. Again, you have to remember something. We're learning the Babylonian Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud is in Babylonia. So we're quoting, these verses and these locations. They didn't have Google Maps, and they didn't have it wasn't people flying every day to Eretz Yisrael. So they had such a clarity, and this is later on. So there's a discussion here. But they have traditions of the Talmud and all that. So we have Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish, again, was the brother-in-law student. He was Mekurav. He was brought to Yiddishkeit by Rabbi Yochanan. So Reish Lakish, again, Reish Lakish lives there. Reish Lakish lives in Tiveria, in Tzipori, that area. He lives with Rabbi Yochanan. So Tzipori says, I did see and witness that Tzipori is a place of flowing of milk and honey. So there's still no reason for Zevulun to complain about their portion. And the Tzipori was so large of a space of milk and honey that it was 16 mil on 16 mil, which we're going to see in a second is a large piece of a large amount, and we're going to see soon. The Gemara is going to say basically that he says Shisha Semil. Rashi says is Dal Parsois, and based on this, Zevulun had an abundance of milk and honey. Sorry, Tzipori had an abundance of milk and honey. So therefore, if Tzipori is in Zevulun's portion, they definitely don't have a reason to complain about what they've been portioned in their portion of land in Eretz Yisrael. Zavas Chal Dvash Izim Oichlim. What does it mean Zavas Chal Dvash? So here Rashi tells us, what does it mean the land flowing of milk and honey? It says like this: Rashi says that the goats eat the figs, the dates. Sorry, v'hadvash noitiv mehen, and the honey flows. V'achalav zav mina izim v'nasan k'min nachal. So between while they're eating the te'enim, that causes that there should be a flow of honey because they're eating it, and then they're giving milk because they're eating it, and everything is sweet, and therefore there's rivers of milk and honey. V'chitem, again, Shisha Asa means 4 parses. V'chitem and nafshi dideka dachayu. Maybe they're going to say, fine, we have milk and honey, but it's not as much as their brothers have. Maybe Naphtali has more milk and honey than them. Again, Rabbi Bar Bachana says, again, Rabbi Bar Bachana lived, I believe, in Bavel, but he said, quoting Rabbi Yochanan, so Rabbi Yochanan, again, is the colleague who lives in the same time as Reish Lakish. He says, I also saw the land of milk and honey, all of Eretz Yisrael. I don't want to, when I say we don't take this literally, it means to say, it's not just to say, literally, I saw it, I took a car ride. I mean, Rabbi Yochanan lived there, so it's not like he's saying a chiddush. The chiddush is that he understood what he saw. He was able to analyze and say, this is Zavas Chal V'Dvash. What is the definition of Zavas Chal V'Dvash? So Rabbi Yochanan says, I saw Zavas Chal V'Dvash of all Eretz Yisrael. And the amount of it was Kimei Koive ad Akra, the Tubalkini. It was from the if you want to measure it in space, it's a space of Koivi till Akra Tubalkli, which is Estim Retartin Parse Urka Upusya Shisa Parse. So how much was it? He says it's 22 parsa in length and 6 parsa in width. That's how much if you wanted to say the amount of Zavas Chal V'Dvash. And if they have Shisha Aser Mil, which is 4 parsas divided by the amount, basically they have plenty of milk and honey in Zevulun based on if you put together what Reish Lakish saw, what Tzipori has, and what Rabbi Yochanan saw, what the whole of Eretz Yisrael has, so divided by the 12 tribes, Zevulun has plenty of milk and honey, so that can't be their issue. He says, he means Rabbi Yochanan. So Rashi explains a little different what I said. Rashi says it's not like everywhere you go. You have to know where the spots are. So he knew where the spots were, and if you took it all together and you added it up, if you want to know how much, if you gathered all the different places of flowing milk and honey where the goats ate from the tamarim and the oil mixed with this milk, all that, so it would come out to be the amount of, like we said before, what was it, 26 Esrim Retard, 22 parsi on 6 parsi of land. So based on that area. Ekra Mokim Ma'avar Hanar. Okay, the place was Ekra the Tubaki is a place where the river was. Okay, this Tosfos is not in its place. This Tosfos we learned before is Toiv Riyas is talking about Tveria. Shahayu Sham Ganis Pardasim. That means it was a nice place, a pleasant place. Tveria was because it had nice fields and gardens. All right, orchards and gardens. I feel hachi. So therefore, why did they complain? Bottom line is Zevulun had. If Tzipori is in Zevulun, then Zevulun then Zevulun it has a beautiful place. There's no reason to complain. So he said, Zevulun was, grass is green on the other side. So Zevulun looked at, they had milk and honey, and they had everything, and they had Chilazon, and they had all that. But they said, but look at Naphtali, they still have nicer because they have kromim and sadis. They have fields and vineyards, and they wanted that. From this also we could see Naphtali was on the high place of the field, which indicates that Zevulun complains was due to the fact that Naphtali the fields are in the high place. So the point was that they were complaining about, they had plenty. Tzipori is in Zevulun, like it looks like it is, but nevertheless they still liked what Naphtali had better, and they saw that when they went to fight for Devorah and Barak in the war of Sisra. Adif Chavivlei. Means they wanted more. So God basically didn't tell them that be happy with what you have and you have milk and honey, but God told them you have other things like the chilazon and the sardines and the sand that makes the expensive white glass. Amr Rabbi Bar, we have 2 minutes. Let's go further. Amr Rabbi Bar says the ikran te'akar. Okay, we're starting now a subject that's going to continue for a while that goes into the area of Kesari. Kesari is Kesaria, which is again, Kesari is surely on the beach north of Tveria. Right? North of Netanya. So if you're driving the coastal highway, so you're going to go Tel Aviv, Herzliya, Netanya, Bat Yam. You're going Netanya, and then the next area is going to be. There is a big waterway which is by Chadera. Maybe that's how they entered. So after Chadera is Kesaria. Chadera is today where Israel's power plant, one of Israel's main power plant is. Also a port. So it says. That Ikron is going to be Te'akar. Ikron is going to be uprooted. What is that? That is Kesari Bas Edom. Okay, now a bit seemingly tired, sore, which also represents when we talk about, we're going to go into this famous idea that says that either Jerusalem or Tzur. If Jerusalem is standing, the Tzur is not there. If Tzur is standing, then Jerusalem is not. And which is based on the interpretation that this idea started all the way in Rivka's stomach, right? Rivka has Esav, which represents Edom. Edom traditionally, we're going to learn, is all of Western society. Edom is Germany, is Rome, Western civilization. So Esav is in Rivka's stomach, and Yaakov is in Rivka's stomach. So the Yaakov and Esav, and there's a struggle. So La'om Yemot, who's the stronger one? When one is up, the other one's down. When Tzur stands, Jerusalem is down. When Jerusalem is down, Tzur is down. Now, Tzur actually, Tyre itself is a city in Lebanon. So it's not really, it's a concept more today than it is an actual place. Because Tyre, I mean, as I'm sure as nice as it is we wouldn't call it as the it's not the Washington D.C. or Rome of today. So nevertheless, Ikron Te'akar, Ikron is going to be uprooted. This is Kesari. This is Kesaria, which is Bas Edom. Why Bas Edom? It's not really Kesaria. Had a longer history. It started with the Greeks, but eventually ended up becoming a stronghold of Edom of Rome. She yesheves ben achoylais, that it's seated among the sands. Again, till today, there's the sand piles that are by Kesari. We just finished this little piece and stopped the class. It was like a thorn. It was like a peg that was takua, that was standing. So it says ve'ekar and te'okar, you have to uproot it. But when it's not uprooted, it's takua. It's like a peg standing, and it stood like a thorn or like a splinter to the Jewish people in the days of the Greeks before Rome. So we're talking about this is in the battle of the Chashmonaim, the story of Hanukkah. And when the Chashmonaim, this again, the story of Hanukkah, as nice as the story sounds in 8 days, it was a long story. Meaning to say, the story of Hanukkah itself, the actual holiday happened before they completed all the battles. It was a process, and it was really completed by Alexander Yana Amelech, the brother-in-law of Shimon ben Shattach. I believe he's the one who really got rid of Sur, of this area. So it says it was a tekua, it was a yased, it was like a peg that was tekua, like stabbing into the Jewish people. Bimei Yevanim in the days of the Greeks. And when they, at one point in their battles with the Greeks, the house of the Chashmonaim, the Maccabees, and they finally beat them. They changed the name to Migdal Shir. Okay, we're going to stop over here, learn more about Caesarea. Hopefully, we'll have a class next week. It is Bedikas Chametz night, but I'm sure Bedikas Chametz will be done either before or after. Hopefully, before. You're not supposed to learn when you have to do Bedikas Chametz. But I think we will have one more class so we can get a class in before Pesach. Again, Laila Tov, everyone. I know we didn't cover too much ground today, but Lefachot, we got in a full class. Thank you so much. Laila Tov, take care.
Thank you, Rabbi.